What part of a white person blacking up to impersonate a black person is not comprehended as being offensive by Phillip Davies, MP for Shipley? Conservative MP for Shipley, Phillip Davies, has been bombarding Trevor Phillips, the Equalities chief, with roughly a letter every other week. And it's never an attractive picture, Philip, a white man chasing a black man unremittingly, don't you think?
I don't know, you tell me, George.
Well, it's kind of got a lynch mob feel about it for me. Or maybe the leaderboard with Tiger Woods in front, I don't know. But it's made the press, Philip. Was that your intention with your majority of just 422?
I didn't make it to the press. Somebody did a Freedom of Information request to the Equality and Human Rights Commission a few weeks ago, and I know that because the Equality and Human Rights Commission asked me if I minded them. They asked for the correspondence between me and them, and they asked if I objected to it being released, and I said no, I didn't.
That's even more intriguing then. You see, I could have understood it, Phil, if it had been about your small majority of 422. But if it was actually private correspondence, why did you write 19 letters to the black chairman of the Equalities Commission then?
Well, I didn't write it because he was the black chairman. I wrote it because he was the chairman.
Well, why did you ask him what was offensive about a white man blacking up?
Well, the purpose of that particular letter was that there'd been some people who had been castigated for blacking up at a fancy dress party when they'd gone dressed up as a black person. And at the same time, a celebrity whose name escapes me at the moment had also gone to a big celebrity event and had blacked up her face at a particular event. And there'd been no complaint about that at all. And my purpose of writing to him was to ask him what was the difference between the earlier examples and this particular example. Why were they so different? And therefore, what was it that was offensive about blacking up? And the point
Do you genuinely not know, Philip, what's offensive about white men blacking up?
Well, the point I was making in my...
I mean, what, do we throw in the big lips as well? Maybe an afro?
Well,
flat nose?
The point I was making was that surely what's important is whether or not any offence was intended.
No, what's important is whether any offence was taken.
So if somebody takes offence at something you say, even though you didn't mean any, you think that you should be castigated?
Yes, if I say something so careless that a person's feelings are hurt, then I've done something wrong. If I've challenged them intellectually, that's a different matter. But if, as I did last night, let me tell you, I used the word dwarf twice and hurt people's feelings, I should apologise for it, and I now do. Because, especially when you're on the culture committee, Philip, it's kind of important to get with the programme. It's kind of important to know what the culture in the country is. And the culture in the country is that black people find white people putting on curly wigs, flattening their nose, thickening their lips and blacking up offensive.
Well, I'm not entirely sure they all do, to be honest, George. And I certainly am not entirely sure that they all do, certainly when no offence was ever intended. And I think that your idea that somebody should be castigated if anybody takes offence at anything that somebody says, I mean, for me is a recipe for disaster, because that means that nobody would ever dare say anything unless some zealot somewhere down the line were to take offence at it.
Well, but it isn't zealots.
I believe, and I'm surely you of all people, George, who have a formidable, rightly have a tremendous reputation for speaking out. Surely you, above anybody else, should be supporting people's freedom to speak out without the fear of some zealot taking them to task somewhere down the line, even though no offence was ever intended.
Well, no, because my free speech is limited by its impact on other people. Now, I can attack you unremittingly, and you me, for what I do, what I say, what I think, But what you're not entitled to attack people for is things that are beyond their control. You're not entitled to attack someone because they're black, because they are disabled, because they are short, because they stammer. You're not entitled to do things like that because that's offensive. It's offensive to criticize or attack or lampoon someone for something that is the responsibility of God if you believe in God, but certainly not their responsibility. Can't you see that?
That's fine if we're talking about people being gratuitously offensive, and I'm certainly would never support people being gratuitously offensive to somebody. But if somebody is not being intending to be offensive, and somebody takes offence by it, then somebody may want to apologise for having caused any offence that wasn't intended. But surely they shouldn't be castigated for an offence that was never intended in the first place.
But you're a clever man, Philip. You're a member of Parliament, for goodness sake. You know that it is not...
Most people might think that those two don't go together, but still.
Well, I know you're an intelligent man, and you wouldn't be on that culture committee if you weren't. Now, the idea that you don't know that it's offensive to black up, for white people to black up and impersonate black people, it's beyond... I mean, I just... If you'll forgive me saying so, I don't accept that you don't know that that's wrong.
I honestly don't see that it is in itself offensive. I think it's offensive if it was intended to be offensive. I think it's offensive if somebody is perhaps trying to, as you described, lampoon somebody because of their colour. But I think that actually just blacking up in terms of getting into somebody's character, I don't see that that is intrinsically in itself offensive.
Well, Prince Harry didn't intend offence when he dressed up in an SS uniform, but it was offensive, wasn't it?
Some people took... I mean, I think the context of these things is also important. I've never believed that any word or any action is in itself intrinsically offensive. I think it's the context in which it's used and the intention behind it that's important. And I think that we actually do a disservice to people by not differentiating sufficiently between people who are being gratuitously offensive and those people who aren't.
Now, you wrote to Trevor Phillips asking if bald people should be protected in anti-discrimination legislation. Were you being serious?
Well, I was being slightly mischievous. In the sense that we've got all of these categories of groups that were supposedly it's discriminatory to act against or speak against, and yet we have a whole category of people who tell me that they are equally discriminated against, and yet the law doesn't provide any protection for those people. And we can go through a fair list of them. There's sort of bald people, there's people with ginger hair, there's short people.
And do you think that bald people... Well,
all of these people always claim that they are...
You've got a fine head of hair. You've got a fine head of hair, Philip. I don't. And I can honestly say that it will astound many of our listeners that you should compare baldness with the problems faced by black and minority ethnic populations in this country. If you don't know about discrimination representing Shipley in Yorkshire, if you don't know what real discrimination means, you think it's just like being red-haired or just like being bald, then people are bound to start wondering whether you're in the right job, Philip.